Welcome to Longevity Industries' presentation of the Destiny of Manufacturing podcast. I, of course, am your host, Dean Phillips. And with me today, I have one of our outstanding leaders here from the Precision Metal Forming Association, who is, of course, our sponsor because it is powered by the PMA. We have with us today Jeff Aznavorian, who comes to us from Clips and Clamps, where he is the president as well as the chairman of the board from our illustrious organization, PMA, or Precision Metal Forming Association. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Dean. Appreciate being on.
It is great to have you here today. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule, especially now that you've taken on being chair. You know how much more time that's going to take as well. Tell me right off the bat, when we look at things, what is your big takeaway for the next, let's look for the next 5 years?
Yeah, Dean, for sure. My big takeaway is that those of us that are knee deep or sometimes neck deep in this illustrious industry and manufacturing of ours, we have to be very prepared for all the changes that are coming our way, all of the hurdles. And through that, that means supporting our people who are the bread and butter, who are the biggest asset we have inside of our manufacturing organizations. And how do I, anticipate supporting those people? It's through a system of upskilling. The days of manual labor being the primary mode of work inside of a manufacturing industry are all but gone. Everything is technology based, everything is data driven. Everything is requiring a higher level of thinking and problem solving, which means that we need to support our staff and our team members in order to make sure that they are prepared so that they can help us move our own companies into the future.
That's a great point. When we look at upskilling, how do you think that PMA can help serve those members in the upskilling as they're going through this process? Because it's not just like, hey, I'm going to decide to do this. This is a constant process, and it takes a little bit of time for people to get over that hurdle. How can we as PMA members, but even more important as PMA itself, how do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the nice thing is we have several programs and processes already in place within the association to help our memberships do that. In fact, one of my themes, my main theme for the association this year is optimizing the connections. And the reason I chose the term optimizing is because those connections already exist. It's a matter of being able to utilize them and push them to their ultimate efficiency and efficacy. So we have things like technical training by Pete Eulentz and staff that's already in place that we can do to help bring Pete into your organization and train your staff or certain members of your staff on particular technical problems that they might need to solve. We have tons of networking opportunities where you can continue to learn from your peers in the industry. One of the things I wanted to make sure I pointed out today is my belief that there is no true success in the manufacturing industry if we try and do this in a vacuum.
Right.
If we don't learn from those around us, we're doomed to failure. The pace at which everything is changing is so fast that we can't possibly hope to be able to solve all the problems on our own. And certain people are good at certain aspects. For instance, like I'm a great people person. So when it comes to management techniques or human resource types issues or, training programs, different things like that, I tend to excel there. I need to rely on people that have a much higher engineering background, much more technical background. And I get those relationships through PMA and many other opportunities as well.
It's interesting that you say that, because when I got out of school from an engineering standpoint, you understood the basics, but those networks that you build of people you can call and ask when you have questions, people that can be your mentors, people that can be there to help support you. That is really critical in your development. I think as a leader in every aspect, having those resources and those connections. I mentioned before to David Klotz when he was on our last episode, one of the things that I remember when I think back to when I started, the challenges that I was faced with, it was those connections that helped me develop in engineering, develop in manufacturing. I started off at Niagara Machine and Tool Works, 30 plus years ago. And when I started there was always an attitude there of, fine, we can help you develop. We can help you understand the picture of, when you take a look at electrical in the greater scheme of things, that's only one piece of the puzzle of developing that machinery. You need to understand the whole process. And it took me a little while to understand all the mechanics, because at the time I wasn't a mechanical engineer, I was an electrical engineer. So you have to have people though that can answer those questions, because when you go out and you're working on a piece of equipment, you need to understand how it works beyond just the electrical aspect. And
Exactly.
and you have to have those people. Now, I will say this, that when we've had events as PMA, the conversations outside of the dialogue of whatever the event is are immensely valuable. I hear that from people all the time. When they come to them, it isn't, let's say they're coming for a safety event. They come out for a safety event, and it isn't the safety event. It's all the other conversation. Hey, what are you doing about your steel prices? What are you doing to deal with this? Is that something you found too?
Oh, absolutely. You're sitting there pining and waiting for the 15-minute break or the bio break or whatever it is, right? To be able to go and talk to the person that you spotted on the other side of the room. It's like, oh man, I got to ask her a question because I've been meaning to ask her something, and you know that she's the expert or something in that field, and you want to be able to go and bend their ear, right? Yeah, for sure. Leaning back to what you were saying before about coming in, we all come in with a set of general educational background into our own industries, right? You came in with an electrical background. You were explaining that story, and I was thinking about a young engineer that we have here at Clips and Clamps. He came in with a mechanical engineering degree. He's still in his mid-20s, so he's a young buck, okay, getting his feet wet. But so he's got all the mechanical engineering theory, but now he's designing progressive dies for us. And you don't just jump from school and then start designing progressive dies. We have over 100 years of experience designing progressive dies in this building here at Clips and Clamps, and he's got to learn from some of that. So his first two dies he's just completed recently, he literally sat in a room with our primary die designer and the second one with our secondary die designer, and they basically worked on the tools together. And then they would walk out to the tool room, discuss concepts associated with different things in terms of the stripper, in terms of the shear, in terms of the clearances and stuff, and everything else. And they would walk back and forth, and it takes time, and it takes learning from the experience and the knowledge and even the mistakes of other people in order to be able to build that up. So yeah, that's definitely key. But yeah, those 15-minute snack breaks at the PMA meetings are definitely worth it as well, which is why I try and get our young people to make sure that they get involved in something with an association. It doesn't even need to be PMA, but PMA is a great example of that.
Right. Yeah. I when you were telling me about that, I thought back to the last PMA meeting when we had one here about a month ago here in Tennessee before the golf outing. We had an event where we had the guys come in from our advocacy side of PMA, and there was a line at the break to talk to them.
Yep. Yep.
Because people are like,
that's outstanding.
But that's how people work together and how this connection is formed and the long-term development. And I see people exchanging business cards and talking
Oh yeah.
about, hey, what are you doing on this? I brought up, we started a group here that was a mastermind group. If any
Yep.
people that are listening know what a mastermind group is, it's a group of people that get together, but what it is they're working towards a common challenge. So think about, like, for instance, workforce development. Well, by sharing this experience together, we can share a common knowledge of how we're going to develop people. And it really helps everybody work together as a team, because we are, in general, our industry is built on mainly small to medium-sized businesses. And consequently, when you're in that smaller size dimension, it's very difficult to compete with your big people like GMs and that
Yeah.
with for people. And they're not interested specifically in getting involved in that network. Whereas, clips and clamps, link systems, we've always worked to try and say, how do we find something that we can work on together to develop a solution? And
Exactly.
it
Yep.
is, it's not always, sometimes it's just a camaraderie of pain.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 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 Pain sharing. Yes, we know. Yeah, we know about pain sharing. Misery loves company is the other one, right? Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting. I just had a thought. We're sitting here talking to each other virtually, recording this podcast for the audience, and this is a great tool. This is an outstanding tool, and there was a lot making it through this pandemic. There's a lot of people, and in my mind, they're actually a little bit negative, saying that the era of person to person communication might be dead. The meetings might be dead. Trade shows might be dead. I can tell you, I think people are yearning for that and yearning for the one-on-one contact and the 10-on-1 contact that they get from trade shows or seminars, more now than they ever were before, because we've been cooped up for the last several years. And for instance, we just had a very successful Metal Form Mexico
Mhm.
just a couple weeks ago. I was talking to David Klotz about it yesterday, and that went very, very well.
Right.
The interest for Chicago is pretty much off the chart. We're almost completely sold out in the metal form portion, so that's absolutely incredible. I think the naysayers that thought that we need to be together no more, I think that's a fallacy. This week, my father, who is 95% retired, he'll probably get angry at me for saying that, but I took the opportunity, and him and I went downtown Detroit, which is just a short 20-minute drive from Clips and Clamps here, and we went to the Automate show in downtown Detroit, which is the largest automation show in the United States. It'll be in McCormick Place in Chicago next year. Wow, the activity is absolutely off the chart. My father and I arrived about 11 a.m. and waited in a line of over 1,000 people just trying to print our badges so we could walk into the show. It was incredible. The energy in the room was absolutely, absolutely incredible. So the one-on-one, optimizing those connections, meeting people, learning from stuff you've never seen before, or just walking up and going, what is it that I'm looking at, and asking those questions, those are tremendously valuable.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with you on the point of disagreeing with the fact that we're not meeting in person kind of attitude. I think is completely wrong, because there's always going to be a need for that. We had people at the Fab Tech show this past year that came by and they're like, where do we learn about this stuff? Because he was a new engineer, but he was asking questions about stamping. And he's like, I'm a new engineer and I'm getting involved in the stamping side of the business. Where do I learn this stuff? Where are the courses that you
Yep.
take? And a lot of it is partially it's handed down. There's that journeyman apprentice aspect, like
Sure.
it sounds like what you have at your company,
Yep.
and that's really critical. The other part of it though is the training aspect, and that's why I've said before the PMA's training or technology is really beneficial if you're looking for forming or fabricating. Those are
Right,
the
it's very
things that people
specific
need
to
to do.
our industry, right? You need to get into into the details of that stuff. And I apologize. I am lucky enough to be a second time guest on Destiny of Manufacturing. So I want to point that out. This is absolutely outstanding. I feel privileged to be there. And I apologize if I've told this story before, but it fits. When my father came to Clips and Clamps Industries in 1985, he had about a 20-year career at Ford Motor Company designing engines and powertrain systems for Ford Motor Company. He knew nothing about the forming of metal and metal stamping. So who did he turn to? Where did he turn to fill in those gaps? The Precision Metal Forming Association. That began our interaction and our basically lockstep ties with PMA as we grew, PMA grew, and vice versa. And we wouldn't be here today with it if it wasn't for those types of connections, that type of training, that type of information that we were able to glean from others in the association. The association is nothing without the people. It is the people.
Right.
So, and it is their knowledge, and it's how they're willing to share that knowledge that is so key and so beneficial.
I think you hit it on the head there too, is that PMA has evolved and grown with its members, and it is the kind of linchpin for our organization, but it's not needed if we don't have members. It's not needed if we don't have a need for those connections, but we do have that need. We
Yep.
all do. And I've often said, people say to me, well, what's one of the benefits of why you're involved in PMA? And I often tell my story of why I got involved was when the steel tariffs hit and I'm getting calls, I'm talking to people and they're saying, we got to make a decision if we're going to continue to manufacture in the US.
Yep.
That was a pretty strong time to hear that. And the only voice we had in our industry was PMA.
Yep.
It was the only voice that was out there saying, hey, we need to do something about this because manufacturing is being crushed by companies who can ship in machinery. For example, at that time
Yep.
was working for Tensmith, who was also a PMA member, but they had to make some decisions too, because every customer that they were selling equipment to was looking at, am I going to be able to do this in the US? Because
Yep.
people were from other countries were able to ship in even through Mexico or through
Oh yeah.
Canada. That was a challenge.
Yeah.
So,
Those workarounds. Yep. Yeah. And you
yep,
remember what it was like back then too, Dean. We were still the PMA, like you said, the association has grown with its membership. PMA at that point was still trying to establish its voice and being able to make sure that it was sending that message. It was there, it was organized, but we had to do a little chest beating in order to make sure that we were being heard back then.
yeah,
That wow, what a change! Fast forward to 2023, we
mm,
are the voice of manufacturing in the Beltway in Washington D.C. now.
yeah,
I mean, I understand that metal forming is a subset of manufacturing, but PMA and our alliance with NTMA and the One Voice campaign, we are the voice of small to medium manufacturers in this country now to the representatives in DC.
yeah.
And that's been a tremendous change. I remember my first DC fly-in, we were having to define the word manufacturing to our representatives. Well, thank goodness that's not the case anymore.
Right. I think most everybody in DC understands now. Unfortunately, it took a while and took a lot of our advocacy efforts
Oh yeah, a lot of effort.
to make people aware. I can remember talking to a local representative here, and they said, "Well, that's really not. It's not in my area. That company closing isn't in my area." Well, no, but companies that supply parts to them are in your area.
Yeah.
And they didn't understand that.
The employees might be in your area.
Right.
The
They think
restaurants that those employees dine at are in your area.
that's right.
Yep,
And
you got it for sure.
a lot of them, they didn't understand the supply chain. That was one of the critical things that they didn't understand, was that when you say automotive, they didn't think of clips and clamps. They didn't think about, companies that supply parts to automotive. They only think of GM,
Toyota,
Nissan,
GM.
Toyota.
Yeah, yeah.
That was how they thought of it. And they didn't think of it as all the supply companies here, especially in Tennessee. And as you know, in Michigan, there's hundreds and hundreds of companies that keep that company going. And that's where, it's really critical for us from a PMA standpoint. Would you say that that is your biggest thing for why you're involved in PMA?
Oh, by far. I mean, I think networking and those learning opportunities are the biggest things. You know, my involvement, and there are, I think there's 6 now, whether there's a 6th one launching. My involvement in an executive networking group that's associated with PMA has been tremendously valuable to my own personal growth as well. In fact, I was involved in that group, and it was part of my involvement in that group that has shaped some of the technical decisions that we've made here at Clips and Clamps over the last couple of years. Our recent push into automation, I probably would have been, to be honest with you, I probably would have been too scared to take the risk to do it if I hadn't seen it work and didn't have the encouragement of my fellow colleagues in that networking group telling me to do it. The way I communicate with customers has been tremendously influenced by talks with my team on just, how to frame those conversations, those tough conversations that you have to have with people above and below you, both your customers and your suppliers. How do you frame those things? Those are all learned from there. I even decided to go back and get my executive MBA because of my involvement with my executive networking group. So, like I said, even though not everything, you can't solve all problems by going to pma.org. You can solve a lot of them, but it's involvement in there that then leads you to other opportunities. It's my involvement in PMA that's got me involved with OESA, which is now MIMO Original Equipment Suppliers. It's my involvement with PMA that got me to go to the Automate show, even though they're not totally connected with each other. It's my involvement with PMA that had me do my executive MBA much later in life, 20 years after I graduated with my undergrad. So yeah, I mean, networking is by far there. We touched on advocacy. Advocacy is very important as well. There's workforce skills development, all that kind of stuff is absolutely essential.
When you talk about other things that the PMA has to offer, as the chair, what other things do you think are critical for us to talk about, as far as what is it that we need to get the word out on?
I think we need to get the word out, and PMA is like we've discussed, is constantly evolving itself. We need to get the word out that things are ever changing. The variables that we have to deal with in our own industries and within our own companies are growing. It used to be kind of felt like, and part of this is just getting older. The younger people can look at me and say, okay, you're a Gen Xer. Now that the Z's say it's the Gen Xers. We can't say okay boomer anymore, but they'll say it's getting older. But in reality, we used to deal with one major issue at one time. Now it feels like we are dealing with 3 or 4 major issues and 100 minor issues all at one time. And I'm sure it feels like that to everybody, but PMA is transforming as a result of that as well. I promised I would say something about this. There was a term that we used to use a lot over the last 20 years that I've had in this industry, and it's a term that seems like we would redefine every couple of years, and we called it the new normal. I'm like, oh, that's the new normal. It's not like that anymore. This is the new normal now. We got to get used to it. Well, the issue is that how often we'd have to redefine that term is accelerating. Instead of redefining it every 5 years, then we were doing it every year. Now we're doing it every 6 months. And now it feels like we're doing it every couple of weeks. So in my opinion, there's no such thing as the new normal. There's no such thing as normal anymore. And so the resiliency that the companies are going to need to build in to their own organizations, to their own processes is going to be absolutely critical. And I think PMA, through its many resources, is going to play a big part in that through the networking groups, by going and seeing what the latest technology is at FabTech this fall in Chicago, by getting involved in the advocacy efforts and making sure that the latest information about the health and the survivability and the thrivability, I'm not sure that's a word, thrivability of the manufacturing industry in the United States is in front of our representatives as well. All of these things are going to be absolutely critical moving forward, and PMA is going to be there along the way to support that. I mean, there's tremendous opportunities through our publications, through our webinars, and everything else, to be able to get the word out and to be able to keep everybody on top of this pile that seems like is getting thrown at us every day.
Yeah. Well, it's been great to have you here today, sir. Thank you very much, Jeff, for being here. We're out of time, but it's been fantastic to have you on the show again. We look forward to it. How can everybody reach you?
You can reach me. You can find some information about the leadership of PMA on the PMA.org. Find out more about Clips and Clamps Industries at clipsclamps.com, and my contact information is on there as well.
Great. Everybody make it a great day.
Take care. Thank you, Dean.